Well, welcome everybody. I am thrilled tonight to be able to be with one of my lifelong heroes and certainly consider a friend to me and my family, David Sterling. We were fortunate to have our paths cross kind of early on in both of our lives a little bit, almost next door neighbors. And David has been a mentor for me as a youth in helping me kind of navigate some of my maybe a wily and crazy days as a youth, and as well now as a father and a husband. David has been able to continue to mentor and to teach me and be a great example. We're excited to have him. He's certainly involved with a number of things these days. doTERRA consumes a fair amount of your time, I assume, David, and we are grateful to have you take a little bit of your time tonight. The service that you've given to my family personally years ago, and then not so long ago with the loss of our little Lily. I know that my wife Stacy definitely appreciated you taking time out of your schedule to visit with us about that and that experience. So we're grateful to have you join us tonight on Survivors, to share a little bit with us about what service means to you and how service in times of crisis has, you've been able to see that, or how that's been a blessing to you and others that you've been associated with.
All right, thank you, Josh, and hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Had a little trouble with my computer getting this going, so I'm gonna use my trusty phone here. But it's my pleasure to be able to spend a few minutes with you this evening and maybe share a few thoughts. I was looking at the introduction that Josh put up there for me, and it's kind of an old one, and probably a picture that has me as a little younger as well. But it mentioned on there, I think, that I had one grandchild, but we're up to 7 now with a couple more on the way.
Oh,
but yeah, that's kind of fun. We have 9 children, 7 girls and 2 boys, and they're grown up now. I have just one left at home, but not really. If you know how that really goes, they tend to come back. And so I watched the new version of the movie Little Women that was just recently put out with Emma Watson as one of the characters there. And as I watched that, I got roped into it with my wife and my girls. I thought, oh, it's a chick flick. I don't really want to watch this, but I wanted to be with them, and so they pulled me into it, and I watched it, and I thought, this is my house. This is my kind of my life right now, and because my girls have come back, some are going to college and so forth, and that's what our home looks like. Only more than 4 girls are present there, but I love it, and we have a lot of fun with our kids. I know Josh mentioned tonight that that he would like me to talk a little bit about, give a message of hope, perhaps, and share a few thoughts. I'll share maybe just to begin with. As Josh mentioned, when they lost Lily a few years ago, I was at an event, and somebody in a crowd actually mentioned that to me, that they'd suffered that loss. I remember I was just in shock, and it brought back a lot of memories for me. Those of you who have suffered the loss of loved ones, either expected, perhaps, or maybe unexpected. I know that we all kind of know what that's like. For me, we experienced one of those losses in our lives a very long time ago now. My mother and my youngest brother, who was 15 at the time, and they were killed in a traffic accident, and it was something that I was a young father at the time with 3 children, I believe. The oldest was 5, and anyway, I remember that time quite well because life kind of stopped, if you will, and went into a kind of a slow motion phase. And I remember we went on living as you do, but like I say, your world just kind of stops, and sometimes you wonder if there's any real purpose in continuing on, and it's difficult, and you try to pick up those pieces, and you go through the different stages of grief, which are numerous. I remember walking through some of those at the time. At first, there's just the gut-wrenching anguish that you experience, and then it moves on through different phases. I remember one of the phases that surprised me a little bit was even a little bit of anger that I felt toward God. And I'm a believer in God, a strong believer in God, and I knew that that was irrational to feel that way. Nevertheless, I remember a short period I went through anywhere where I felt some of that. And so you go through these stages of when you lose a person, of grieving for them as a young person, as an older person. It seems like there's all parts of their lives that one goes through, and it just takes time to heal from those types of things. But some of the things that we found that I found very important at the time was service. And I'll tell you this, one of the things that I've always found and appreciated, before you lose a loved one like that, I think when you run into other people who suffered loss, you may wonder what to do, how to act, if you should say anything, if you shouldn't say anything, and whether or not that's that you're going to hurt their feelings by bringing something up again. Once you've lost someone and gone through that, that part doesn't seem to be as big an issue anymore. It seems like, well, at least for me, you know what to do, and I almost always will say something and express, my heartfelt, sorrow for the loss, or that you miss that loved one as well. And it always, I think, is pretty much almost always appropriate to do that. And I think when we do that, when we actually mourn with others, in fact, even when we may, have emotion and weep for them and for their loved ones, I've become a believer that we actually, in a way, take some of that burden that they're carrying on their shoulders and take it on to our own shoulders. And we're able to alleviate that burden to one degree or another, and to help them with that grieving process. And I think that's a little bit of what it means to mourn with those who mourn, and to help them in that process. It's anyway, as I look on today now, and as Josh mentioned earlier, one of the greatest things that we can do when we're looking to pull out of a situation where we've lost a loved one, and it may have devastated, it may even have thrown us into a depression. And, it's one of the greatest things that we can do is to serve, and to start serving, and lose ourselves in serving other people. Even when we first start out, if we feel a little bit numb in doing that. I had an experience in the last, I travel a bit with my work, and I also travel sometimes with some of our work that we do with the foundation and with Healing Hands, and trying to help out with different lives around the world. And so about a week and a half ago, I spent a week in Somaliland, and I'm careful to say Somaliland instead of Somalia. They like to be recognized, as a sovereign country, even though the rest of the world doesn't really see them as that. But they're trying to do things a little different than the rest of Somalia. But we opened a new hospital out there, And it's been a big project, and it's taken a long time out in Aragavo. And but I met a woman out there that kind of changed my life. That was a bit of a chance meeting, and her name's Edna Aden, and she is, I would describe her as being the Mother Teresa of Somaliland. She was the first lady of Somaliland. Her husband was the president back in 1991. She went on to serve as their foreign minister. She's spent a lot of time, in service and serving her country and trying to make things better, and frankly, a pretty rough part of the world. But what she made the greatest difference in was creating a hospital. Anyway, in Ergesa there, and she created a hospital, and she also created a university for teaching other students to be medical, either nurses, doctors, things in the medical profession. She herself was trained over in England as a medical professional, and she wanted to bring that Somaliland. In so doing, she has touched almost all medical people know of her. I don't know how many that she's influenced, but it's very significant. As I traveled with her for a total of 4 days, it took 2 days of driving on Somaliland type roads to get out to Aragavo, where we had our hospital, and 2 days to get back. But you get to know people a little bit, and but the shocking thing for me is whether I would be meeting with politicians or different high level people, or I was out in a remote village, a frankincense harvesting village. We're out in Somaliland. That's where we get about 75% of our frankincense, the resin for our essential oils. And in fact, I visited a remote village out there, and these are extremely poor people. And when they came, they recognized her. They knew who she was. Everyone knew who she was. I'm pretty sure that she is probably the best known and most revered person in all of Somaliland because of her service, because she's given her life. She's now 84 years old, and she kept up with us on what was a very grueling trip, and went from sun up to late at night in working and in serving. And so she was amazing in the impact that she's had on that country. So anyway, she was one that had, like I said, had a deep impact on me. But it wasn't the roles she had as the first lady. It wasn't the roles she had as a foreign minister and other political roles that she played. It was clearly that where she'd given her life to create a hospital. As the children would come in with things like, everything you can imagine, but they'd come in with spinal bifida, something we don't even have to deal with in the States. It's caused more by just poor nutrition, in the early parts of pregnancy. And you'd see them with big growths on their back, and then they'd have to put a stent in their head to relieve the pressure because their heads would grow huge, and try to relieve the pressure and with the fluid that couldn't be reabsorbed by the body. And just saying, oh, these children, there's probably 5 or 6 of them that came in with something like that. And another, little boy that came in and he'd been kicked in the head by a camel, and it just kind of caved his head in. And you see everything in Africa. Another person that needs a DNC, that if the hospital wasn't there, she probably wouldn't have made it. And many, many other things, amputations. And these are the kinds of things you see on day 1, day 2, day 3 of opening a new hospital. And there's so much need. But she completely blew me away, because instead of, she speaks many languages, I think 4 anyway, fluently. And she has means, or she could go off and live the rest of her life in great comfort, but she chose not to do that. And she chose to actually do everything in her power to lift her countrymen and to make a difference in their lives. And anyway, she's one that certainly had a tremendous impact on me in seeing someone who is choosing to serve. As we and she's written a book, and I'll have to get the title of that book, but her life is a woman of first. It's called, by Edna Adden, and her life certainly was not a simple one. It had horrors in it, and anyway, you can read a little bit more about her. But as we start to emerge from this pandemic, and I see people all over the world, not just in the United States, and of course in different countries, they've had very different experiences with this pandemic and how it's affected them. In the United States, there are some that have lost loved ones, and our heart goes out to them. There are many that are feeling the effects or felt effects of isolation, and it's just closed them off, or maybe they've gotten pulled into those echo chambers in social media that I think we all learned a lot about. Social media was such a wonderful tool, and we all got a lot better at Zoom and different online means of communication, I think. But we also, I think, learned some important lessons and perhaps suffered some of that isolation and not having that human contact. And then to get in these echo chambers where we have our own beliefs or ways that we feel being echoed back to us, and we even start to perhaps see others who disagree with us in the worst of lights. And I it's been fascinating for me as I watch different people whom I know both parties very well. I know that they have great, wonderful families. I know that they have faith and they're believers. I know that they serve and they care for other people. And I would see different individuals start to view one another with great animosity and feelings like they were some sort of an enemy. And a lot of that just happened with this echo chamber that is social media that we have to be so careful of. But I saw a lot of people start to, I think, suffer with loss of faith and maybe loss of hope. And I thought maybe tonight I would just share in the last few minutes I have with you just a few thoughts about hope and how important that it is. To me, there are a few things more important in this life than gaining, obtaining, and retaining hope in our lives. With it, we can, we have a brightness, a bright outlook for the future. Without it, we find ourselves in despair and, and in darkness, and it can be a crushing thing. I know that. And hope is something that we really need to seek after and to try to obtain and to get a hold of and to retain. To me, when the scriptures talk about a perfect brightness of hope or a surety of hope, and those are phrases that are very meaningful to me because because hope is hope when I'm not talking about the kind of hope, first of all, that, gee, I hope we'll get more rain here in Utah where we have a severe drought. All right, I hope, it'll be a good day at work tomorrow or something. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the God-given hope, where a person is given, maybe that sort of a realization that they have the right to hope. That's where the real power of hope for me comes, is where we have experiences in our lives where we have the right to hope. We know that we have the right to hope. And that's a stronger thing. That gives us the fortitude and the ability, I think, to start to grab hold of the future, and to really perhaps make things change and cause things to happen that otherwise maybe wouldn't happen. I'm going to ask my wife, who's with me, just to lower these blinds a little bit. The sun is starting to come in here, and maybe she can just make that a little bit better light-wise here for you. I disappear in the sun glare here, but there. Hopefully that's better. Maybe not. I'll move it here. Okay, that works out all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to, we have very difficult experiences in life, and sometimes they're caused by our own actions, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're things that happen in our lives that we suffer at the hands of other people's actions or poor decisions, and but either way, I'm always fascinated by people that have the ability to metabolize that poison and not pass it on to future generations. I remember way back in the day that I had more interaction with Joshua. He was just growing up as a young man, a teenager. And this was a long time ago. This was a good, probably 25 years ago. But I remember getting to know a particular woman whom I looked up to, that I had a young family at the time. And this woman and her family and her husband, they were a little further ahead. They had, 4 or 5 kids, and they were teenagers. And anyway, they were just a family that I looked at and thought, wow, that family is a family of peace. The children are children of peace. I want my family to be like that. And it was, and so I just kind of looked up to this family that way. After it was several years later that this woman once wrote me an 8-page handwritten letter and stuffed it in my mailbox. And I read that letter, and I was shocked. I was stunned, because it was a description of her life growing up as a little girl, and horrific and horrible abuse that she suffered at the hands of her own mother and others, and how she had always looked around at other families and thought, why did I have to experience everything that I've experienced? And why couldn't I have, been like, other families and so forth. Anyway, as I read this letter, like I say, I was shocked and I was stunned. And as I visited with her later about this a little bit more, I just became so amazed. I'm convinced that there are some people that are sent in to be parts of lineages that are sent there to actually change a lineage and to change the direction of a lineage, perhaps a family where there's been generations of horrible suffering and abuse that comes down from parent to parent and so forth, parent to kids, and through other generations. And yet sometimes a person is introduced in that family, like this woman, like this incredible mother, who had the ability to metabolize that poison and not pass it on to other generations. Before her, the family, the lineage was troubled. After her, it flows pure and clear. And that to me is an amazing individual that's able to somehow metabolize what they've experienced in life and not pass it on. Edna Aden was one of those people out in Somaliland. What she experienced, the horrors that she experienced as a young girl, and somehow she was able to metabolize all that and not pass it on, and bless many others and future generations going forward. I think it's important, like I say, to remember that hope. Scriptures talk about faith, hope, and charity. I always thought, well, the order's a little messed up. It should be hope and then faith and charity. But I've come to understand that no, it's the right order, because the kind of hope that they're talking about, at least to me, is not the kind of hope that, I hope my corn will grow. I hope I'll get a better job. No, this is the kind of hope that comes after faith. It's the kind of hope that comes when a person who has faith and who's trying to exercise that faith and do all they can in their life is given, to them to know that they have the right to hope. And when a person is able to obtain that, grab hold of that, it's life-changing. It changes everything. It allows us to heal, it allows us to serve other people and to go forward in life. Maybe I'll just end by sharing with you a favorite quote. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to remember this off the cuff because I didn't review this, but it's a favorite quote of mine in regard to faith. And it goes something like this. There is another kind of faith, rare indeed. This is the kind of faith that causes things to happen. It is the kind of faith that is worthy and prepared and unyielding, and it brings forth things that otherwise would not be. It is the kind of faith that moves people. It is the kind of faith that sometimes moves things. It comes by gradual growth. It is a transcendent power, as real and as invisible as electricity, but directed and focused, it has great effect. It fascinates me to think that we as individuals might, through faith and hope, cause things to happen that otherwise would not be, where we can actually bring about good and light and brightness in other people's lives and in our own lives at the same time, and actually change the course of people, of our own families, of ourselves, and perhaps even a lot more people. That's what an Edna Aden does, is change the course of lives of probably thousands and thousands in her lifetime. And if we can heal and gain that kind of hope in our lives, it comes through serving others, it comes through exercising and gaining faith in God. And I know that it's a very real and powerful and transcendent thing that allows us to metabolize those very difficult things that can and do happen in our lives, and not pass them on to others, and also bless us to be able to be tools in helping others to find healing and progress in their lives. So anyway, those are just maybe a few thoughts to share this evening off the cuff there. And Joshua, I don't know if you have anything to add or you have any questions you'd like to ask here, but I'd be happy to share more if you do.
Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time. I think few of us probably can appreciate the sacrifice that it is to find some time to do this for that. And that's a service to all who will be listening tonight and those who watch this in the future. To have your thoughts is certainly a form of service to us, and we appreciate that service. I don't know if you recall or if you're aware, but a couple of things that come to my mind as you were speaking is when my oldest brother, Jess, passed away, your father and your mother were two of the very first people to come to our house was probably at 7 a.m. They were out for a walk, and your mother and father had heard of the news because of your father's assignment in the church at that time, and they came right to our front door as part of their walk. And I remember how much that was needed at that very moment, that they showed up and that they were there at that very time. So it's neat to see that in many ways that service is often put when it's needed at the right time and in the right place. Also, I don't know if you remember, Danny was my age. So, and Danny and your mother died the same year that Jess died. Jess died in March, and your mother and Danny passed away later that year, just December 31st of that same year. And I think that seeing you and seeing your family go through that, you are an example of not taking that poison, as you put it, because loss certainly seems like a poison in our life. Sometimes it seems bitter, it seems hard to take, and it's hard to swallow. And my parents certainly are an example of what you speak. You're aware of some of the other things that were happening in our life, and I, to this day, thank my parents for taking that hard thing that they experienced in their life and the best that they could, not passing on badness from that, but passing on good, passing on more hope, more strength, more faith, desire to be better and to do better. So your message rings clear with us in Survivors for sure.
Well, Josh, I wasn't aware that my parents had dropped by at that time when you guys had lost Jess, and it's amazing how much of a small world it is. One of the things I remember very well is visiting with your father. And this was not long. I had moved into the neighborhood, and I was new in the neighborhood, and I wasn't there when Jess passed away, and I didn't know him. I never knew him. And but visiting with your father, and your older brother Luke was preparing to go on a mission, and this was a very difficult thing for your father to do. He just lost one son who didn't come home, and to send out another was just hard. And yet he was willing to trust in the Lord and doing that and be supportive. And of course he was. Your parents are some of the most amazing people that I know, and as is your entire family. We remember people that come into our lives and touch our lives in times of loss, and one of the people in the area that is well known in Pleasant Grove area is Steve Allred and Mitzi Allred, and they lost their parents in a tragic head-on collision, accident that happened that stunned the city because they were such, icons of the city. Steve's parents were, and he was one of the first people. Steve Allred, that showed up over at our home, that next morning after our loss of my mother and my younger brother Danny. And I'll never forget his influence or his words. He knew what to say. He'd been there, he'd experienced that. And he told me how, he says, Dave, he says, the Spirit of the Lord's going to carry you for a while. It's going to carry you, in a way through this experience for some time. But the day will come that he'll set you back down on the ground again on your own 2 feet, and he'll step back a few paces. And you will know when that day comes, when that happens. And I'll never forget that, and him sharing that. And he was right. He was right. You are carried through a lot of that. And I do remember that time when, after some period of maybe a couple of months or something, where I was kind of set back down on my own 2 feet again. And you got to start, 2 or 3 months later, you got to start figuring things out and moving past forward in life. When we go through experiences like that and loss, like that, it's hard. It's extremely hard. Maybe there's parts of us that never do recover, that we might carry with us some of those wounds the rest of our lives, perhaps. But there is some healing that can always happen. And but one thing for sure is it enables us to know what to do and to be able to provide more in helping others who have been through similar loss and suffered similar things.
David, would you mind, one of the things I think may be interesting to hear, would you mind sharing with us just a little bit about what doTERRA is helping or Healing Hands is engaged in?
Well, we have a lot of projects that happen around the world. We started the Healing Hands part, the humanitarian part, right at the very beginning. It's more than 10 years old now. And we end up doing, more than 150 projects every year. But some are really big and significant, like that hospital. Some are smaller, but still significant. We get behind people. We love to partner with people. They have their own desire, their own thing that they're interested in helping with, and whatever it might be. Maybe it's an orphanage, maybe it's teaching kids to read, whatever it might be. And we love to get with them and to combine that, and they participate financially, to meet them halfway, and they come halfway, and we love to participate in that, and just try to bless lives. One of the things about doTERRA, because of the nature of our products being essential oils, we have a massive sourcing aspect to it, where we employ, or provide jobs for more than 300,000 people now around the world, because we need so much essential oil. And so we go out into these parts of the world, like Somaliland, or like a Haiti, or a Guatemala, or Brazil, or wherever it may be, and the people that are doing the growing, distilling, harvesting of the essential oils, the plants, and so forth. It try to look at what they need and what they're in need of. Sometimes it's education. They want to educate their kids at school. Sometimes it's medical clinics. Sometimes it's water, clean water, whatever it may be. It's lots of things. Then, of course, we try to bring that to these harvesting families. And so there's many opportunities, certainly all over the world. And when we turn around, we serve. It doesn't have to be something that's big and glamorous. We can serve our neighbors. We can serve in our own communities. There's lots of opportunities. And when we start to give of ourselves, then, that is truly what this world's about. You go out of this world, essentially what you come into it with, right? Which is nothing. You're not going to take anything with you. Anything that you might accumulate in life, it's not going with you. And so really all you leave behind are the relationships, the good that you've done, the lives that you've influenced, hopefully for good. That's, for me anyway, and then what it becomes all about.
Great. Well, we sure do appreciate your time tonight. This month is our service project is kind of a relief. So we're helping and partnering with in whatever ways we can to the American Red Cross for kind of disaster relief. Each month we try and have a service project of sorts. Some of them are tied and partnered with causes such as that, and some of them are more on a small scale where you find somebody to buy their groceries for. But every month we have a service opportunity. So I think that what you've just described with the Healing Hands, in terms of reaching beyond ourselves, this month certainly will be a month where we as survivors can have an opportunity to look to those who have loss as a result of a storm or some other natural disaster crisis that occurs. So I think your words of hope, I really like the gaining, obtaining, and retaining of hope. And I like the type of hope that you talk about that's a gift, because I know that. And that's what I think you've brought something up that I'm excited to talk with those who we work with on this is, I think that's what service gives people, is it gives them and helps them bring to a healing where they have hope. And it's a hope that they didn't have before. And it's that hope comes through faith. And their faith is that action that they get out and serve, and they get out and serve somebody else. They taste of something that wasn't there before. And I think what that is hope. Hope that life can get better. Hope that there still might be light even after this terrible loss. Hope that they can feel love again, that they can feel happiness again, that they can legitimately and sincerely smile about something in life, because all of those things disappear when tragedy or when crisis comes and life is filled with darkness for a period of time. So I certainly do appreciate your time again tonight, and appreciate your thoughts and your wisdom, and encourage and hope the best of wishes and things in all of your endeavors around the world with doTERRA. So we definitely appreciate you doing that and helping
Thank you,
out.
Josh. It's been a pleasure of mine to spend a few minutes and to share a few thoughts, and hopefully there's something useful that might help someone else there.
Great. Thanks so much. And you have a wonderful evening with your family.